Okay, happy Monday from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Here is a summary of the Channel News Asia's article on Donald Trump's controversial telephone interview that was aired on Sunday, November the 29th, 2020 on Fox News. In the first TV interview since losing his re-election bid on November the 3rd, President Donald Trump indicated on Sunday that he will never concede to Joe Biden, who is the president-elect, or abandon his conspiracy theory about mass ballot fraud. It's not like you're going to change my mind. My mind will not change in 6 months, Trump told Fox News interviewer Maria Bartiromo. However, since Trump has made during his single presidential term over 20,000 false or misleading statements, according to one count, percent confident that he will go through with this, because he earlier this month did admit, albeit grudgingly, that if the Electoral College votes against him in December 2020, as is almost 100% guaranteed, he will vacate the White House in January 2021. This election was rigged. This election was a total fraud, he claimed, again without backing this up. In other words, without citing any provable evidence. We won the election easily. In the 45-minute interview, Trump's first on television since the November the 3rd election, he provided mostly a monologue of evidence-free, and Bartiromo was later criticized by some or several fellow American television journalists for virtually never challenging him to provide facts. Despite Trump's unprecedented attack on the US election system's validity, his legal team has yet to provide any evidence that stands up in court. Case after case has been rejected by judges around the United States. The latest rebuff came from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which on Saturday, November the 28th, turned down a lawsuit filed by Trump supporters seeking Biden's win in Pennsylvania. We're trying to put the evidence in, and the judges won't allow us to do it. They have allowed when there has been enough evidence to be considered. But in most cases, there hasn't. So they are hair-splitting, for example, those silly claims that the Republican election observers were not allowed to be close enough to the vote counters. They were, given the social distancing rules caused by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic under the Trump administration has miserably failed so far. And since the election day, November the 3rd, 2020, thousands of people have died of the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. At least 1 million new cases, if not more, maybe close to like 2 million new cases have been discovered, and Donald Trump has done virtually nothing to assure that his administration is doing all that it can. We are trying. We have so much evidence, he claimed. Ignoring the usual boundaries between his office and the judicial and law enforcement system, Trump complained that the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were not helping him. Well, why should they help him when there is no evidence of a massive vote fraud? He claimed that they are missing in action, also questioning the point of the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, if it doesn't intervene. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court, for his information, is the highest appeals court of the United States, and laws passed by the U.S. Congress to make sure that they are constitutional. So claiming that the only reason, or implying that the only reason the U.S. Supreme Court exists is to overturn a free and fair election shows how far removed from reality he tries to be. We should be heard by the Supreme Court. Something has to be able to get up there. Otherwise, what is the Supreme Court, he asked. The 2020 election was not even especially close. In fact, in terms of our vote, although the electoral vote was exactly the same, according to the initial projections, although 10 electors then voted otherwise. Because in 2016, Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton, 46% to 48%, or by some 3 million votes. Again, he claimed without citing any provable evidence that there had been vote fraud. Not to challenge the election results. Then in 2012, then incumbent US President Barack Obama defeated his Republican challenger Mitt Romney by the same margin, 51% to 47%. Romney chose not to challenge the election results. In 2004, then incumbent US President and Republican presidential candidate George W. Bush also received about 51% of the vote. I think John Kerry, then US Senator for Massachusetts, later the US Secretary of State, I think Kerry got about 48% of the vote, but he chose not to challenge the election results. So we have to go all the way back to 2000. I'm old enough to remember this, by the way, to find a case where for several weeks after the election day, the main loser, still has challenged the election results. And even then, Vice President Al Gore only challenged the election result undervotes or improperly punched voting cards. And then he was decent enough eventually to give up his resistance 5 weeks after the election day, after having initially congratulated George W. Bush. It was only after those allegations of improperly counted votes in Florida had surfaced that he had withdrawn his concession. But having conceded the election, he then cooperated with the incoming George W. Bush administration. And wisely, the former Vice President Al Gore has never again sought public office because, of course, charges of sore loser would have been automatically one of them. And after this shameful attempt to overturn a free and fair election, it would be beneficial for Donald Trump never again to seek any elected public office, especially at the federal level. Unfortunately, given his extreme pride and egoism, it's likely that he will try to become the US Republican Party's presidential candidate for the third time in 2024. Hopefully, the moderate, liberal, and centrist and reasonable, sensible Republicans will team up behind an electable candidate who also will accept the election in order to defeat then former President Trump's effort to return to office in January 2025. Of course, he could still run as an independent, but that would be basically the same as being a spoiler candidate, or as we say here in the Philippines, in the official Philippine political jargon, a nuisance candidate, although in the Philippines, such nuisance candidates who don't seem to have any clear chances of getting elected and who are there just to get publicity, a number of candidates. In the United States, it would take then a formal petition to remove them from the ballot. And the US also allows, at least in quite many states, so-called write-in candidates who are not even on the ballot, but whose names people can write in the ballots. In the popular national vote, which does not decide the result but still has political and symbolic heft, Biden won by 51 to 47%. Losing almost immediately. But whether or not Trump ever publicly acknowledges defeat, the Electoral College is all but certain to go through the formal motions of confirming Biden when it meets in the respective state capitals and Washington, D.C. on December the 14th. And in that case, Joe Biden will be sworn in on Inauguration Day on January the 20th, 2021. Even as his single term is ticking towards its close, Trump declined to say for his unsuccessful legal campaign. I'm not going to say a date, he said. Asked if he saw a path to victory, he said, I hope so. So even he is conceding indirectly that he doesn't really believe that he can win. And after all, as the Pennsylvania Supreme Court pointed out, ballots must decide the elections, not briefs. Voters must decide the elections, not courts.